So we've been learning about how to solve inequality problems that have absolute value symbols in the problem. What we're going to do today is put together like a formal list of steps that sort of details how to do these problems. We're going to break them down into two types, problems that have a less than and problems that have a greater than, and then we're going to look at some specific examples. So the first step in every one of these problems is always going to be to isolate the absolute value. In the end, you want your problem to have an absolute value symbol and then some sort of an inequality and then the number on the other side. It's really important that there are no numbers outside of the absolute value symbol. After you have a problem that has the absolute value symbol isolated, the next step is to decide if you should make a less than sandwich or a great or than, which means you would really have two separate problems. So, if the problem has a less than or a less than or equal to. You take the inside stuff and you put it in the middle of a sandwich. And that sandwich is going to have a less than or equal to on both sides. Then you put the positive version of the number on the right side and you put the negative version of the number on the left side. Same goes here. Positive goes on the right, negative goes on the left. You're making a less sandwich. Now, if the problem has a greater than or equal to symbol, then you're going to make two separate problems. The first problem will be the inside stuff is greater than the number. This is going to look the same as the original. The second one will be the inside stuff and then less than the negative number. Now this symbol right here is always going to be flipped from the original symbol. So if it used to be a greater than, it'll be a greater than or equal, or it'll be a less than. If it used to be a greater than or equal to, it would be a less than or equal to. The next step is to solve these problems. Now, in the end, the last step, the very last thing you have to do is to graph the solutions. Let's make a note in the solve part that you must flip the inequalities if multiplying or dividing by a negative number. The same rule about regular solving inequalities problems still applies here, so we still have to watch out for multiplying or dividing by a negative number. All right, let's take a look at an example. Again, if it's a less than problem, you're going to have the inside stuff in the middle, and you're going to make a sandwich where the positive number is on the right and the negative number is on the left. And sometimes it will be that the inside stuff is in the middle and it's a less than or equal to, but the positive is still on the right and the negative is still on the left. If it's a greater than, then you're going to end up with the inside stuff is greater than the number, and then separately, the word or, the inside stuff is less than the negative number. So I put a little negative symbol there. Also, you could end up with the inside stuff is greater than or equal to the number, or the inside stuff is less than or equal to the negative number. It just sort of depends on which symbol you actually start with. All right, so let's look at both examples. The first example is going to have a less than symbol, and the second example is going to end up having a greater than symbol once we've rearranged it. So step one is isolate the absolute value. In this problem, that means I'm going to add the 5 on both sides, which means I get 3 times the absolute value of 2x minus 7 is less than 9. Then I'm going to divide by 3 on both sides, and I'm going to get the absolute value of 2x minus 7 is less than 3. Now, because this is a less than symbol, I'm going to create a less sandwich. So because the problem has a less than symbol, whatever is inside of the absolute value goes in the middle. We put less thans on both sides. The positive number goes on the right, the negative number goes on the left. Then we're going to solve this. So I'm going to add 7 to all 3 sections, and I get 4 is less than 2x, which is less than 10. Then I'm going to divide all 3 sections by 2, and I get 2 is less than x, which is less than 5. Now that is my solution, and then the last step, you can't really see what I wrote. The last step here would be to make a graph. So on a number line, if the 0 is here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I would have an open circle on the 2, open circle on the 5, shade in between. Okay, that's an example where we have a less than. Now an example where we have a greater than would look like this. Let's start by isolating the absolute value. So I'm going to subtract the 5 on both sides, which gives me negative 3 times the absolute value of 2x minus 7 is less than or equal to negative 9. Then I'm going to divide on both sides by negative 3. And because I am dividing by a negative, my inequality symbol flips over and it becomes a greater than. So because it flips and it becomes a greater than, we're going to set this up as 2 separate inequalities. The first one will be the same as the original. 2x minus 7 is greater than or equal to 3. Then in the middle, we're going to put the word or. And then on the second problem will be 2x minus 7 is less than or equal to negative 3. Now we're going to solve those separately from each other. So we're going to add the 7 on both sides. We get 2x is greater than or equal to 10. We're going to divide by 2 on both sides, so x is greater than or equal to 5. Separately, I'm going to add the 7 on both sides, and I get 2x is less than or equal to 4. Then I'm going to divide by 2 on both sides, and I get x is less than or equal to 2. And the word or goes in between. So this is my solution. This is like the final answer. And the last step would be graph your answer. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Closed circle on the 5, closed circle on the 2, shade to the outside. Okay. Let's take a look at some examples. Here we go. So problem number 1. The first thing I notice is that the absolute value is already by itself. So I don't need to do any rearranging for that part. What I do need to do is decide, do I have a greater than or do I have a less than? In this problem, this is a great or than symbol. So I know that I'm going to end up making two separate problems here. The first problem will be the same as the original. 8 minus 3x is greater than or equal to 7. Then I'm going to put the word or, and then the second problem will be 8 minus 3x. Now I'm going to flip the symbol and make this a negative 7. So let's solve these. I'm going to subtract the 8 on both sides, and I get negative 3x is greater than or equal to negative 1. Then I'm going to divide by negative 3. Now I notice here I'm dividing by a negative, so my symbol is going to flip over, and since a negative divided by a negative is positive, I'm just going to change that to positive 1/3. Now in the second example, just subtract the 8 on both sides. I get negative 3x is less than or equal to negative 15. Then I'm going to divide on both sides by negative 3. So x is greater than or equal to 5. And again, my symbol flipped over because I divided by a negative. Now my last step here is just to copy down the word or in the middle. And this is my final answer. At the very end, I'm just going to graph my solutions. So closed circle on the 1/3, closed circle on the positive 5, shade to the outside. Now, in problem number 2, the first thing I need to do is isolate the absolute value. So I'm going to divide on both sides by negative 2. I get the absolute value of 4x plus 3 is greater than 4. Again, my symbol flipped over because I divided by a negative. Now, since it flipped over, it became a great or then. So that means I'm going to create two separate problems. The first problem is going to be 4x plus 3 is greater than 4, just the same as the original. Or, and then the second problem will be 4x plus 3 is less than negative 4. So I'm flipping the symbol and I'm changing it to a negative number. Now I'm going to solve. So I'm going to subtract 3 on both sides, which means I get 4x is greater than 1. And I'm going to divide by 4, so I get x is greater than 1/4. In the second part of the problem, I'm going to subtract 3 on both sides, so 4x is less than negative 7. Then I'm going to divide by 4 on both sides, and I get x is less than negative 1.75. I'm just dividing that out and making a decimal. You could also change 1/4 to 0.25. I'm going to put the word or in between. And this would be my final answer, or my solution. Now to graph that, I'm going to put an open circle on the 1/4, which is in between 0 and 1, and an open circle on the negative 1.75, which is in between negative 1 and negative 2, and I'm going to shade to the outside. All right, problem 3. Again, we have to isolate the absolute value. So I'm going to start by adding 8 on both sides. Actually, you know what? Let's go ahead and skip over to problem 4. Now, example 3 is going to be another great or then, and I want to make sure we do at least one less than problem before I'm going to be done with the video. So let's go ahead and skip over to problem 4. Again, I'm going to isolate the absolute value. So I'm going to add 14 on both sides. 6 times the absolute value of 2x plus 9 is less than or equal to 30. Now I'm going to divide by 6 on both sides. So I'm going to get the absolute value of 2x plus 9 is less than or equal to 5. Now here I see I have a less than, which means I'm going to make a less and which. So, how do I make a less sandwich? Well, I put the 2x plus 9 in between. I make both sides have the same symbol, less than or equal to, and I put the positive 5 here and the negative 5 here. Now I'm going to subtract 9 on all three parts. So negative 14 is less than or equal to 2x, which is less than or equal to negative 4. Then I'm going to divide everything by 2, and I get negative 7 is less than or equal to x, which is less than or equal to negative 2. Now from here, I'm going to put a closed circle on the -7, a closed circle on the -2, and I'm going to shade in between. We're going to go ahead and stop there. We will practice this a lot more tomorrow. Thank you so much for taking notes and watching, and I'll see you then.